Good morning everyone. Today is Tuesday the 19th of July and it's the second day of this heat wave we're having, and it's going to be 38 to 40 degrees Celsius again, and we're going to try and do a video because we haven't done one in about, I think it's been over 2 months now, so we're really slacking. So I'm sorry about that, but let's go up the workshop. I'm just walking up the workshop from my house. It's about 7:45 in the morning. We've been doing 7 till 3. Try and stay out of the heat a little bit in the afternoon. Let's go and see how the boys are.
Don't look good.
Oh yeah, look at those. Oh, I got some.
No, I'm going to wear these in my head all day.
Jack, can we do this video?
I'm not talking, I'm really
Literally filming right now. Alright. Okay, right, I'm gonna go. I need to turn the radio off. Welcome to another video of Friends Green Porsche Prep Book. I'm sorry it's been a little while since we've done one of these. It's been about 2 months in fact, but we've got an interesting one for you here. On the ramp behind me, we've got a 997 Gen 2 Carrera 4S Cabriolet. Second video in a row that's featuring a Cabriolet, that Ollie. And we've got quite a lot of work to do to it. Now these 997 Gen 2s are just getting to the age now that they need quite a lot of refresh work. So let's have a look through what's being done. Okay, we'll start at the front. So, as is often the case, we've got leaking condensers. So the air conditioning isn't working. Condenser 2. Carry on at the front. I could do with a light actually. Right, let's come to the front suspension. Now, this is quite common. We do this a lot on 996s and 997 Generation 1. So we're now finding it a lot on the Generation 2. So here's the bump stop, the infamous bump stops that we are always replacing. I haven't got any fixing points to put this torch on. But if we pull the bump stop down and look at the top of the strut on the shock absorber, you can see it's eating into the strut there. So we'll be replacing both front shocks. At the same time, we'll do those bump stops. They're just starting to perish a little bit. I mean, they're okay. Thanks, Jack. Change these dust bellows, change the top mounts.
Well, I drank a cup of tea on my engine.
That's engine oil.
It's coffee, mate.
Coffee. That goes in.
That's the engine oil, mate.
Should have put it in. Yeah. Come on, big guns, I need you.
Right. On the front brakes, somebody has just, and I mean literally just, renewed the pads. However, upon our inspection, we measure the discs as well, and those discs are on Porsche's recommended minimum tolerance for thickness, so you can see the lip on the discs there. So ordinarily, it's very bad practice to replace just discs without pads, but they are brand spanking new, so we're going to replace just the discs on this occasion. Good morning all. It is actually 2 days later and I'm going to show the progress on the car. As you can see, the front end is back together. The rear end is now apart and going to be worked on today. If we show the progress that was made at the front end. So in the front air ducts, we've got new air conditioning condensers because the old ones were leaking. So once regassed, the air conditioning system will now work. We can see the old condenser on the floor there with the wet patch where it was leaking. So that's the sign of dye coming out in the gas. The front suspension has been renewed. So we've got 2 new Bilstein PASM shock absorbers on there. New top mounts, new top bearings, new bump stops and dust bellows. If we have a look why we were doing that, so if you remember, here are the old shocks here. They're just eating into the top of the strap there, the corrosion. These aren't too bad, but they're just at the point that we like to replace them. So if this was a customer's car, this is a sales car of ours, we may have said to the customer, you can leave those for a little while longer if they didn't want the cost at the time. But it's only a matter of when and not if with those. You can see the old top mounts there, which weren't terrible. They look terrible now because I think Jack's been heating this one up. Well, he has been heating this one up. To get that one to move, it's obviously a bit seized. Top bearings there. And then the new brake discs. As you can see, these are pretty pitted and grooved, and you can see the lip on the outside edge there. So the minimum tolerance that Porsche give for this particular car is 32 millimeters across there, and they were measuring at bang on 32 millimeters. Right, let's have a look at the rear end. Okay, unlike this car's predecessors, the 997 Gen 1 and the 996s, to replace the spark plugs with the major service, the rear bumper has to be removed and the back box have to be removed. And the reason for that is the spark plugs are very tightly compacted here behind this top heat shield. So there's 2 heat shields, coil pack heat shields on the Gen 2s, this one and this one. And to get to the bolts to remove this one and gain access to the spark plugs to remove them, the back box obviously usually sits here. So that has to come out. And to get that out, the bumper has to come off. So there we are, the back boxes are down there. The bumper's there, and the major service is midway through completion. But when we're doing this major service, as you can see, the lower heat shield we've just mentioned, this one here, is heavily corroded and needs replacing. But you can't get to that lower heat shield without removal of the catalytic converter, which is also part of the manifold. So the manifold needs removing, which is part of the catalytic converter, which means unbolting them from the cylinder head, which we know can be problematic if they're seized, and also removing the 3 fixings from the triangular flange, which connects to the centre back box here. So a lot of work to change some coil pack heat shields and some spark plugs on the Generation 2 997 in comparison to the predecessor. day 3 on the car is complete then. It's about 5:30. Everyone else has gone home. I'm down here just to run us through what's been going on with the car today. So, as you saw in the earlier clips, the rear of the car was dismantled and being worked upon. The main job being the major service interval. Now, the major service intervals on these cars is the same as the predecessors. It's every 4 years. As part of that major service, we like to do the spark plugs. Not all garages do include the spark plugs as part of the 4-year major service, but we do. And to get these spark plugs out of these Gen 2s, it's not as straightforward as it is on the Gen 1s and the 996s before it. Let's have a look why. As we can see, the rear end of the car is fully back together now, but earlier in the day it was dismantled to change those spark plugs, and I will show you why that's necessary. So if we look through this gap in the wheel arch here, you can see those nice new coil pack heat shields. There's 2 per side. Unlike the earlier models which had 1 per side, you've got the upper one at the top, funny enough, and the lower one here, and they're kind of joined in the middle because they're mounted with the same fixing bolt there. Now, it's the upper one which has to be removed to allow access to the spark plugs. But as you can see, there's not a lot of access there. You can get to this bolt, but you certainly can't get to the bolts that are hidden up there in that gap, if the camera will focus. So to gain access, firstly, you have to remove the rear bumper, as you saw earlier on. That then allows you access to remove the rear back boxes. That then allows you access to remove the top coil pack heat shield, and then you can get to the spark plugs and change them. But because we were also changing those lower coil pack heat shields, to gain access to the bolts that hold those on this side, you have to remove the cat. And the cat on these is part of the manifold. So not only do you have to replace and remove these 3, which we call triangular flange fixing bolts, which are usually, and on this they were, very badly corroded and have to therefore be grinded and kind of punched off and take a lot of time. You also have to remove the bolts that hold the manifold to the cylinder head. And as we know from previous cars and previous videos, that can sometimes be easier said than done, because those bolts get very badly seized inside the cylinder head, and when you undo them, they snap, and you've then got to drill out the old bolts and re-tap and recover the threads. Luckily on this car, I mean, it took a bit of patience. Jack managed to heat up each individual bolt and remove them without any bolt snapping or threads stripping. He did run a tap up each one afterwards just to make sure they were nice and clean. So there we go. That's what's entailed with that. Let me show you actually the old coil pack heat shields. So there you go, they're the lower ones, and that's why we wanted to change those. They're the upper ones, they're not as bad. They're actually okay, aren't they? But yeah, the lower ones, not so pretty. So I'm just going to run us through the second service interval we're completing on 997 Gen 2, and that is the gearbox maintenance. Now this is a PDK car, and the PDK gearboxes are supposed to be serviced every 6 years. The first 6 yearly interval is a fluid change, and you've got 2 types of fluid in the gearbox. You've got the gear oil, which lubricates the gears, and you've got the dual clutch fluid, which lubricates the dual clutch. The second 6 yearly interval, you change the fluids, but you also change the filter within the gearbox, and the filter within the gearbox is actually part of the sump pan. So I've got it here at our desk. It's actually a plastic item, this sump. So that sump encapsulates the filter. You can see there, they're one whole unit. This is a genuine Porsche one. I wouldn't be using a third-party sump for the gearbox. It's a very important part, and you don't want to be doing this labour twice either. So we use genuine parts. I think these are actually they're quite expensive. It's about £280 plus a VAT for that part alone. And the dual clutch fluid is very expensive as well. So you can see here, Jack's actually got the fluid draining overnight from the sump bung. He'll then be removing that and obviously replacing it for the other one. You also need to have P-Wiz to do that maintenance, because when you're filling it up, you need to be able to run the car and the gearbox through the service modes on P-Wiz to open up certain channels and alleys and stuff in the gearbox to allow you to fill it up with the right quantity of fluid. You also need to monitor the temperature of the gear oil and the gearbox while it's being done as well. So that's being done on the car. Yeah, I'm not sure why that service interval seems to get neglected, but we always get positive feedback from customers after it's been done. If they come down with their PDK 997 Gen 2 and they have the fluids changed or the full 12-year service, they always report back there's a positive change. You'll find on the Gen 1 cars, they're kind of a bit more slow to engage in first from a standstill and reverse. By Gen 1 cars, I mean Gen 1 PDK gearboxes, by the way. The 991s and the 981s had the Generation 2 PDK gearboxes, but I'm waffling on now. So yeah, it's a 12-yearly interval, the one we're doing here. This car's 2009, so it's a year overdue. If you've got a Gen 2, check out that yours has been done, and if not, get it done. Lastly, we had a few other trivial bits and pieces done today. So the wheels, when we got the car, were just refurbished in kind of a satin matte grey throughout. We've had them refurbished properly in the glossy grey colour between the spokes and then a diamond cut finish. So they look absolutely beautiful. There was a coolant pipe sleeve on the centre of the car, which we won't see now, but you can see where the work's been done because of the wet under tray. That's where it was leaking essentially, and it's been wiped down now. Anyway, that was leaking, as is the way with 997s and their coolant systems. We've had the near side front outer CV boot was changed. The rest of the major service was completed, of course. The spoiler mechanisms were cleaned and lubricated because they were creaking, as was part of the soft top roof mechanism. I think that's our lot. It's had a new fuel cap. It's had its drains cleared in the bulkhead. It's had the air ducts cleared, obviously when the air conditioning condensers were renewed. That's our lot. Hi everybody, welcome back. It's Saturday afternoon. I'm actually on the way to the gym right now, hence the vest and the terrible tan lines across my arm that were caused by the hot weather this week. But yeah, I thought a good opportunity to get in the car, go for a drive, see how it's performing, following from the work that was done this week, and give some feedback. So it was I'd say it was bang on 3 days worth of prep work. And you might think that's quite a lot for a 997 Generation 2, a 2008 to 2012 car. This one's a 2009, so it's 13 years old. You kind of forget how old these cars are now. This particular example's done 65,000 miles. So at 13 years old and 65,000 miles, that's kind of the threshold that you're finding they're needing this refresh work. Particularly the bits and pieces that we did. So, I mean, fair play to Jack this week, because credit where it's due, this car is driving superbly well now. I'm really, really impressed. But the bits and pieces that he's been doing this week to this car are kind of our bread and butter, so to speak. It's the stuff that we've been doing for years now on the earlier stuff, and now on these 997 Gen 2s. So if I start on where we started in the week, we started on the front end of the car. We did the air conditioning condensers. I can report back, I've now got lovely cool air coming through the air vents. I did have the roof down earlier, but I thought you wouldn't be able to hear me with the wind noise, so I put that back up so you could hear me. We then did the front suspension dampers. Now the corrosion was eating into the top of the struts. They weren't terribly corroded, but it was at the point that we like to do them ideally. Like I said earlier in the video, if it was a customer's car that had come in for an inspection and work, I'd have a conversation with them and say, look, you don't need to do them. You certainly don't need to do them now, but you are going to have to do them at some point. It's up to you and depends on what your budget is and how much you want to spend on the car at this time. I guess it depends on what other work would be needed with their car. We of course also did the front top mounts and the top bearings and the bump stops and the dust bellows, the normal bits and pieces, while we were doing the shock absorbers. And I can report the car feels lovely and sharp on the nose now. We then moved on to, I mean, I won't go through all the trivial bits and pieces. We moved on to the rear of the car and did the major service. The car's running really well. The engine's crisp, it picks up well, so all is good there. As we went through, the spark plugs are an absolute pain to do on these cars. Porsche made it much more difficult, I guess. Well, a cynic might say so they could spend more of your money with them when you have the service done. So that's done. While we're there, we did the heat shields, didn't we? Because they were going to need doing at some point or another. It's not something that's going to improve the way in which the car drives, but they needed doing. Obviously, all the exhaust fixings were all changed, which is going to make life a hell of a lot easier for the next person that works in that area, because they won't be seized and corroded and generally a pain to work on, like Jack found. We then did the PDK service, so that does make a real difference. Like I was saying, it's a really neglected piece of maintenance, the PDK servicing. So fluid change every 6 years, fluid and filter, which is part of that sump that I showed you, every 12 years, but it does make that gear change a lot crisper. 6 years is a long time to go. I mean, a lot of them, they're getting to 12 years old and they've never had even the fluid change, not even the 6-year one. So customers report back to us that it makes it a lot more crisp, particularly in first gear and reverse gear. So like I was saying earlier in the video, and I was sounding a bit muddled actually because I called it a Gen 1 car. This Generation 2 997 has the first generation of the PDK gearbox, because of course the 997 Gen 1 had the Tiptronic gearbox. This was the first car to have the PDK gearbox, so we call it the PDK Gen 1. But they're quite slow and they slip a bit in first and reverse when first moving away from a standstill. So if you're finding that in your 997 Gen 2, check when your fluid was last changed, see if it's been serviced. If it hasn't, get that done and you'll probably find a notable difference. I think that's about it really for us to speak about. We had a load of trivial bits and pieces. Like I said, it was pretty much bang on 3 days worth of work. I've got the document here, I can't go through it, but I can report back to you the total cost. So we always give an estimate with the car that's being sold for the car's history file. That's 3 pages, and that came to 5,500 with the VAT. So the car will be going on our website shortly. Brad's got to detail it first. It's still aesthetically as it came in. So he'll spend a day and a half doing our detailing process. Maybe I'll put some stories on Instagram of him doing that actually as a follow-up to this YouTube video. I'll do that. If you don't follow our Instagram page, @FriendsGreenPorsche, give that a follow, and we'll do a kind of sequence of stories showing the detailing being done before and after kind of thing. So yeah, it'll be on our website shortly. It's a really lovely car. I made a really bold statement to Ollie earlier today. I said that this is the nicest convertible that we've ever had in, and I think I stand by that, although I know it is a bold statement. We don't do many convertibles, but we do like the wide body ones, and the reason being, when the roof's down with that wide rear body and wide haunched arches, they just look really mean, and I've said it before, a bit like a speedboat, I think. So yeah, lovely car. A bit of background on it. The chap that I bought it from reached out to us. He bought it during the pandemic, and he was finding that he wasn't using it enough, and therefore it was for sale. We're getting that quite a lot now. People bought these cars during the pandemic, and they're just not using them, so they're getting sold 18 months, 2 years later. It made me laugh actually. He had another Porsche specialist go and have a look at the car, and the Porsche specialist introduced himself as a Porsche YouTuber because he does some videos on the cars he sells. And when the guy rung me, he said, look, I've had this Porsche YouTuber come and have a look at it, and he hasn't found anything that it needs whatsoever. So I thought, yeah, it's going to be a really clean, nice car, but I still anticipated it was going to need a few bits and pieces, as we found, because they're kind of just off that age, and sure enough, it did. So yeah, 997 Gen 2s now. do your due diligence and expect that they'll need a few bits and pieces. Once they're done, they're absolutely cracking cars. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.